Jesus and his disciples are on their way to town. As you'll remember, Jesus is the only person in these stories with eyeballs. And it's early morning, and as they're going, Jesus is a little bit hungry. And so he sees, oh, there's a fig tree here. So let me go and see if there's any figs on that fig tree. And so he goes over to the fig tree and he looks to see, are there any figs? And he sees there is not a single fig. And he is so angry. There's smoke coming out of his ears. And he curses the fig tree and he says, "Fig tree, may nobody ever eat fruit from you ever again." And immediately the fig tree withers and there is nothing left of it. And all of the disciples are amazed and they say, "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" And Jesus says, that's no big deal. Like, if you have faith and don't doubt, not only could you do what was done to the fig tree, but you could also say to this mountain, "Go and cast yourself into the sea," and it would be done. That's a mountain, and that's a fig tree. And Jesus says, you know what? Whatever you ask for in prayer, it will be done for you. And Jesus goes into the temple courts, and he is teaching all of the people. Doodly, 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 doodly. And some of teachers of the law and the elders, they all come to Jesus and they have a question for him because they see what he's saying and they're not like super happy about it. And so they say, "Hey, Jesus, who gave you the authority to say such things?" And Jesus says, you know what? That's a really good question. I will also ask you a question. You remember John the Baptist, don't you? He was like preaching in the desert and telling you to repent and all those things. Well, whose authority did he teach with? And the teachers of the law and the elders, they all go away for a minute because they really need to consider this carefully. And so they're having a little conference on the side together and they say, we don't really know what we're going to say because you see, all the people think that John the Baptist was a prophet. So if we say that John the Baptist's authority came from men, all the people will be so angry and they may like try to hurt us or something. But if we say that his authority came from God, well, he said a lot of things to us that like we should have believed if they came from God, and we should like change our lives if what John the Baptist said really did come from God. So we can't say that because that would make us look really bad. So they go back to Jesus and they say, you know what? We don't know who gave John the Baptist the authority to do the things that he did. And Jesus says, I guess that's an acceptable answer. And if that is your acceptable answer, my acceptable answer is going to be the same. I am not going to tell you who gave me the authority to do these things. But instead of answering your question, I will tell you a story. There were 2 sons, and the father came to them, and he said to the first son, "Hey, son, I need you to go out and do some work in the vineyard." And the first son says, "No, I'm not going to do any work in your vineyard." And then the father goes to the second son, and he says, "Hey, son, I would really like you to go and work in my vineyard." And the second son says, "Yes, I would love to go work in your vineyard." Then the father goes away and he does his business. And while he's gone, the first son has a change of heart and he says, "You know what? Dad asked me to go and work in the vineyard, so I will go ahead and go and work in the vineyard." And the second son also has a change of heart and he says, "You know what? That sounds like a lot of work. And it's really hot today. I don't want to go work in the vineyard." And Jesus asks the people who are standing there, who was it that did the will of the Father, the first son or the second son? And they say, well, obviously it was the first son. He said no first, but then he went and did the work. And Jesus says, yeah, that's right. You know what? There's people like tax collectors and prostitutes and people who just cheat and lie and steal, and they are actually getting into the kingdom of heaven because they are repenting and are changing their ways. But people who have heard what they should be doing and have been called to repentance but are refusing to repent, those people are not going to make it into heaven. And Jesus says to the elders that you've seen that the tax collectors and the prostitutes are repenting and are entering heaven. But even when you've seen this, you still have not repented yourselves. Now, here's another story for you. There once was a landowner, and he had a vineyard, and he planted it himself, and he took good care of it, and he said, okay, what are the things I need to go in the vineyard? How about a wine press, obviously, so we can make some wine, and also I should put a watchtower in the vineyard to make sure nobody comes in and steals anything. And this landowner needs to go on a trip, and he finds some tenants who are going to take care of the vineyard while he's away. And they make up a contract which says, okay, yes, of course, we will pay our rent on time and we will give you so much of the produce. And here is the stuff that we're signing. We're putting our names here. We agree. And so the landowner goes on a trip. And while he's away, the tenants are plowing the vineyard and picking the grapes and making the wine and all of the things. And the time comes when the landowner expects to get some produce from the vineyard. And so he sends some servants to the tenants to get the produce. And the tenants say, we don't want to give you any produce. And so they beat the servant and they send him on his way. But the landowner just keeps on sending servants and says, hey, it's time for you to pay up. Go ahead and do it. And they keep on beating these servants and killing them and torturing them in various ways. And so finally, the landowner says, this is enough. They must just think that my servants are liars, but I will send them my own son. And so the landowner sends his son to the tenants, and the tenants say to themselves, this is the son. Ha! We know what will happen. Let's go ahead and kill him, because when he's out of the way, the landowner's not going to have anybody to give this vineyard to. And so it will be our inheritance because we've been living on it for so long. And so when the son comes, the tenants kill the son. And Jesus says, what do you think about this story? What is the landowner going to do to those tenants? And the Pharisees and all the people there, they say, those tenants were wretched people, and they are going to come to a wretched end. And Jesus says, yeah, that is the way it is. You know what? In the scriptures, it says there's this stone, and it's a stone that all of the builders rejected. But in the end, this stone is the cornerstone on which the whole house is built. Or it's the capstone, the shining glory of the house. Even though all of these people who thought they knew what they were talking about, they rejected the stone. But it really is the most important thing that you could ever imagine. And this is glorious in God's sight. And the kingdom of heaven will be taken away from people who should have been caring for God's people and God's work on this earth, and it's going to be given to other people. And everybody who falls on the cornerstone will be crushed, and everybody on whom the cornerstone falls will be crushed. And the chief priests and the elders, they know that these stories are about them, and so they're pretty upset with Jesus. And so they start plotting to see how they can get him killed. And while they're plotting, Jesus tells another story. He says, there was a king, and this king had a son who was going to get married. And so the king made a guest list, and he invited everybody, and they said, yes, RSVP, we will be there. And so the king prepares a great feast and a banquet for all of these people who are going to be coming to celebrate with him and with his son as he's getting married. And there's lots of food and delicious things, and the hall is all decorated and all the things. And so the king sends his servants to go and tell the people from the guest list that it's time for the wedding, and please come and celebrate with us. And so they go to all of the people who had been invited, and they say, hey, it's time. And they say, we're busy, actually. On second thought, we're not going to be able to make it. And so the king sends more servants to these people to say, hey, it's time. Please come to the wedding. And so as he's sending his servants, these people who had been invited and had said they were going to come, they end up beating these servants, and they kill them, and they just hurt them and are very shameful to them. So once this was a guest list of people who were honored to be invited to the banquet, but it has become a hit list. And so instead of sending servants to go and invite these people, the king sends an army. And the army goes out, and they totally and utterly destroy the cities of these people that had been invited but refused to come to the banquet. But the king still has a banquet, and the king still has a son who's getting married, and he still wants people to celebrate with him. And so he sends his servants again, not to the people who were just destroyed, who had said that they would come to the feast. Instead, he sends his servants out to the highways and the byways, to all of the poor people and the people standing on the street corners, and he invites these people, who maybe most of society would overlook, and invites them to come to the banquet. And so they all come to the banquet, and they celebrate with the king. And as the king is going around and welcoming all of the guests and chatting with everybody, he sees one person who doesn't have wedding clothes on. And he says to this person, how did you get in here without any wedding clothes? And that person doesn't know what to say. He's totally speechless. And so instead of getting to join in the banquet, he is cast outside into the darkness, where there is great weeping and where there is gnashing of teeth. And Jesus says the truth is that many are invited, but few are chosen. And the teachers of the law all this time have been planning and plotting and trying to come up with a way to trap Jesus. And so they send someone to Jesus and they say, "Hey, Jesus, we know that you're a person who follows the law and teaches what is righteous and good, regardless of what anybody says. So we have a question for you. What does the law say about taxes? Is it right to pay taxes to the government or not?" And Jesus says, "You guys are a bunch of hypocrites. Show me a coin." And so they bring a coin, and Jesus says, "Whose inscription is that on that coin?" And they say, "It's Caesar's inscription and Caesar's picture on there." And so Jesus says, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's." And all these people, they hear this and they're amazed and they're like, "Wow, Jesus is the best. Those Pharisees totally tried to get the best of him, but he just trounced them." But they're not finished yet. And so they send somebody else to Jesus. Now, this person that they send to Jesus is a Sadducee. And the Sadducees don't believe that there's any resurrection, that once people die, they're just dead, and that's the end of the story. So they have this question for Jesus. They say, "Okay, Jesus, about the resurrection, we think it doesn't make any sense. So here's the story. Tell us how it could possibly make sense that there could be a resurrection with this story." In the law, it says that if there is a man and a woman who get married, but this man dies without having any children with the woman, his genealogy still needs to continue. And so in order for that to happen, the law says that this man's brother should then go and marry the wife, and then he can have children with the wife for the brother so that the brother's line can still continue, and then he can have his own children also with the wife, and his line can continue, and everybody's family lines can continue. So here's the situation. There was a woman, and there were 7 brothers. Now, the first brother, he marries the woman, but he dies without having any children. So the second brother does his duty, and he also marries the woman, but he also dies without children. So the third brother marries her and doesn't have children, and the fourth brother marries her, and this just keeps on happening. Every one of these brothers has married the woman, but none of them have had any children with her before they've died. Now, in the resurrection, there's going to be this one woman, and there's going to be these 7 men who have all resurrected, but whose wife is she going to be? She can't be the wife of all 7 brothers. That just doesn't make any sense. And Jesus says, okay, actually 2 things. One thing, you don't understand the resurrection, because in the resurrection, there's not going to be marriage. Instead, everybody is going to be like the angels in heaven, who are not married and don't get married. The other thing that you don't understand is the power of God. God is the God of the living. In the scriptures, it says that God is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, if there was not a resurrection, he would be the God of the dead, and you have totally missed that. And the people, again, are amazed at what Jesus has said, how the teachers of the law sent their best people to him to question him and try to trap him, but he was not trapped. And so they still have another question. And so they send another guy to Jesus, and they say, "Jesus, in the law, there's a lot of laws and rules. And which one would you say is the most important one?" And Jesus says the most important rule is to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And also the second rule is like it, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And the truth is, that's what the whole law is about, is to love God and to love humanity and to bring flourishing to humanity. And while the Pharisees are there questioning Jesus, he has a question for them. He says, "Whose son is the Messiah?" And they say, "Well, the son of David, obviously." And Jesus says, "Okay, yes, true. But in the scriptures, David says, through the Holy Spirit, he says, 'My Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet.' So how can the son of David also be David's Lord?" And the Pharisees don't know what to say to that. So they had tried all these tricky questions to trap Jesus, but they found that actually, in the end, Jesus had just trapped them with his questions, and he was smarter than them. So they gave up and they went away. And Jesus starts to teach the people who are there with him and all of his disciples. And he says, you know what? The Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they stand in a place of spiritual authority and power. They know what the scriptures say, and they teach you the truth from the scriptures, and you should definitely listen to them and do what they say, because they really are giving you the true words of God. But the Pharisees don't actually live by those words of God. Instead, they kind of just do their own thing. So don't follow the example of the Pharisees, but definitely follow their words. You see, instead of loving it to follow the scriptures, the Pharisees actually love to be seen by men. They go around with their fancy hats and their long robes and their verse packs, and they love to tell you how many Bible verses they've been memorizing and all of the good deeds that they've done. And they love when they go to a banquet to get the seat of honor at the banquet, where everybody can see how wonderful and important they are. And they love when they're going down the street for men to see them and say, oh, Rabbi, hello, Rabbi, so good to see you. Hello, teacher, it's so good to see you. They love these terms of honor and respect, and they want people to know how important and how godly they are. But you should not seek these terms. In fact, you should not call anybody rabbi or teacher, because you only have one rabbi and one teacher, and there's only one who is good, and that is the Christ. And he is the one you should honor and respect. Jesus says to his disciples, I know I've told you this before, but people who honor themselves and seek the places of glory, they are going to be humbled. But the people who are humble and meek and serve others, they are going to be the ones that God is going to exalt. And Jesus lists 7 woes. He says, woe to you, Pharisees and teachers of the law. You are hindering people from getting into heaven. You tie up heavy loads for people and you say, carry this heavy load, but you don't even lift a finger to help them. In fact, what you're doing is you are shutting the kingdom of heaven so that nobody can enter, and you're not even entering yourselves. That's a huge problem. And Jesus says, woe to you, teachers of the law, and you Pharisees. You travel all throughout the earth trying to win a single convert to your cause. But in the end, you don't actually get real converts who will follow God and enter the kingdom of heaven. You just make converts who are going to be children of hell, just like you. He says, you Pharisees, you teachers of the law, woe to you. You are like blind guides. You tell people, when you swear, you should not swear by the temple. No, that would be silly. Instead, you should swear by the gold that is on the temple, and then your words will be worth something. But what's greater? Is the gold greater than the temple? The temple is the thing that makes the gold sacred. So if you swear by the temple, you're swearing by the person who dwells in the temple. And you tell people, don't swear by the altar. No, that would be silly. Instead, swear by the gift that's on the altar. Is the animal that's on the altar the thing that's holy? No, it's the person that you're giving the gift to. The God that you serve that makes the altar holy and that makes the gift holy. So you are totally missing the point when you are telling people how they should swear their oaths. Just as an aside, this is a long passage and there's a lot that I could forget. So definitely go and check it out for yourself and make sure I didn't miss anything. If I did miss something, just post that in the comments below and then we can all learn together and be encouraged by your words. And Jesus goes on to say, you Pharisees and teachers of the law and you hypocrites, you're so careful, you grow your mint plant and you're careful to tithe 1/10 of your mint and of all of your spices and your herbs. But while you're busy doing that, you're neglecting really important things like justice and mercy and faithfulness. And you should tithe 1/10 of your spices, but you should not do it at the cost of ignoring these really important things that should be the priority. You see, what you are, it's like you're a cup. The cup is really dirty. But in order to appear better than you are, you take a lot of effort to make sure the outside of the cup is clean. So it looks totally pristine on the outside, but inside it's full of bitterness and greed and death and all kinds of nastiness. You don't actually want to drink out of that cup. And similarly, you're not just like a dirty cup, you are like a tomb that has been whitewashed. So you might go to the graveyard and you see this beautiful, pristine tomb. And it's clean and white and there's flowers there and all this stuff. But inside, you know what's inside of there. It's just dead bones and dirtiness and filth and everything that is unclean. And that is what you are like. You're so focused on the outside appearance that you're totally missing what really matters. And you take great care to honor the dead prophets. And you say, you know what? Our forefathers treated these prophets badly. But if we lived during the time of our forefathers, we would have treated them with honor and respect. And Jesus says, okay, so you are aligning yourself. You recognize that you are the same people who killed all of the righteous prophets, and you are seeking to honor these people who have died. But now I am sending you new prophets and new teachers and new people who will tell you how to follow God's law. But you are not listening to them. You are going to kill them, and you are going to crucify them, and you are going to flog them. And so in this way, not only will you be responsible for the death of these people that you kill and flog and crucify, but because you were honoring these people and you thought you would do better, you're also going to be responsible for the death of all of the prophets who have died in the past. And Jesus says, oh, Jerusalem, you are such a wonderful place. Oh, Jerusalem, I wish I could draw you together like a hen gathers her little chicks. I wish I could love you and lavish all of the good things on you. But you treat my prophets and my priests, you treat the true people who really are trying to follow God, you treat them with contempt, and you kill them and you destroy them. And the truth is, I am going away, and you are not going to see me again until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.